Today, we will remember our histories and reminisce on things that remind us of our families, our homes, and old stories. All the while, our discussion will spark hope and allow us to reinvent what the future can look like for SWANA individuals on this campus. This conversation, started by past SWANA alumni who we are so grateful for, will live on through us and allow us to dream bigger and want more for our community. With that being said, I'm so excited to present Ken Habib and the iconic Arab Music Ensemble. They have a pre-recorded performance for us that they will be showcasing. So I'll give the floor to Ken so he can introduce the ensemble and their lovely performance.
Thank you, Tisa. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, so it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. The Cal Poly Arab Music Ensemble is very happy to do this performance. You know, hearing a student like you, Tisa, just reminds me of why I'm at Cal Poly, you know, teaching. It's the best part of the job, teaching. It's not the only part of the job, but it's the best part of the job. So this is, and by the way, a wonderful shout out to some of the Arab Music Ensemble folks I see in the audience. It's great to see you here. Thank you for coming. And thank you also to audience members who I recognize in the audience. It's great to see you here. We are really looking forward to meeting again in person, not only, you know, to be in class together, but because we get to make music together again in the fall. So it's been, for those of us who play music, we get this. For anybody who might not, it's been a strange experience for a year, figuring out how to negotiate making music together from behind a screen, you know. So just to give you a 20-second version of what students have done in the ensemble, they've sat behind a screen like I am and like you are, and we've met together this way, and we've learned how to play music together, which isn't really together because we can't be together and we can't hear each other play at the same time. And we're about to see a video that we put together specifically for this event, this SWANA event. It wasn't slated to happen otherwise. So I just put it up at the top of the list and everybody rallied to it and did it. And so the way that they did it is, for all intents and purposes, by pulling out their phone and recording a video of themselves. And then at the end of the day, I received the videos, so I got some 40 videos. You'll see 26 of them in what you're about to see, and you'll hear the audio for pretty much all 40 of them mixed in. This is a draft of the video because I only got the videos on Monday, so I was only able to start this on Tuesday, on top of working full-time, teaching, of course. So it was a short night of sleep last night, but there is a draft from beginning to end of this video. I will officially invite you to our June concert, which it will be a more formal performance of videos from this academic year. That is on June 5th, a Saturday night, and it's just a short contained affair from 7 to 8 p.m. If you would like a notice of that, just shoot me an email at calpoly, KHABIB at calpoly.edu, and I will send you the info for it. Okay, here we go. I am going to share my screen, and this video is about 4.5 minutes long. Let me know if there's any problem with it, okay? And I will mute myself.
يا ورد فتح بين
Thank you so much, Ken, and the Arab Music Ensemble. We appreciate it so much. Y'all always kill it. So good every time.
Our pleasure. Thanks.
Okay. So now we can transition into the question portion of the event, starting out with introductions from all of our beautiful panelists. We have 4 panelists today, and they will be sharing some of their experiences with their SWANA identities here at Cal Poly. So for the introductions, we can share our name, pronouns if comfortable, major or what you teach, your SWANA affiliation, and then a favorite SWANA tradition that you have, that you hold. So yeah, we can start off with Dr. Farah Al-Nakib.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's wonderful to be here. It's amazing to see such a tremendous turnout, and thank you to Tisa and to everybody for putting this together and for that beautiful performance from Ken and from the Arab Music Ensemble. That was just mesmerizing, and it astounds me how you're able to do that virtually. My name is Farah Naqib. I am a professor, assistant professor of history. I specialize in the modern Middle East as well as other classes, topical classes, but that's my regional focus. I'm originally from Kuwait. I moved here to Cal Poly 3 years ago. My favorite SWANA tradition, I think it's going to just have to be food and cooking more than is necessary for the number of people that you're cooking for. I think that's always will be my favorite thing, and something I've become even more attached to since I've moved here and away from the Middle East in the last 3 years, is just cooking in excessive abundance for people.
Yes, very relatable. Okay, next is Hala.
Hello, everybody. My name is Hala Bakri. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm a lecturer in the theater and dance department. And my SWANA affiliation is Arab, specifically Lebanese and Syrian. And my favorite tradition is also food. Like, that's all I could think about when she asked that question. So yeah, definitely an important part of maintaining that that connection while here in SLO. So we should definitely cook together sometime.
Okay. Hi, I'm Rita, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. My SWANA affiliation is Armenian, and my favorite SWANA tradition is, it kind of has to do with food, but more like how most SWANA cultures are very welcoming and open to new people, and it's like whoever comes into your home is automatically part of your family. So that's what I love.
Also, Rita is joining us from Armenia. So yeah, she's very dedicated.
It's 4 a.m.
My goodness. Okay, Zoha.
Hi, my name is Zoha. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a fourth year ethnic studies and psychology double major with a minor in women's and gender studies. My SWANA affiliation is that I'm Pakistani, and my favorite SWANA tradition is just large family gatherings. I have a large family, and I really enjoy getting together with my family. I enjoy also getting together with other people's families and getting to know just like other people's families. I love how welcoming other people's families are and how welcoming my family is. I think that's just one of the things that I really enjoy about SWANA families.
Beautiful. Okay. Amazing. Okay, so thank you everyone for your responses. And we can jump right in with the first question, which is kind of can serve as an introduction to this panel covering the term SWANA. So the term Middle East or Middle Eastern is so common and ever present in the news, in our education systems, and even as just a casual term that people throw around. Why do you think it's important to shift our language away from the term Middle East and shift towards a more inclusive title such as SWANA, which stands for Southwest Asian and North African? I can put the question in the chat as well.
Is there any order you want us to go in?
Yes, but also feel free to, jump around and yeah.
So we'll go in the same order that we started?
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, the most important thing is, Middle East, it's one of the only places in the world, probably the only place in the world that still uses the colonial terminology for where we are, right? So Middle East means Middle East of somewhere, right? And that somewhere was Europe. And so once upon a time, there was the terminology, the Europeans used the terminology Near East, which was sort of the areas in the Levant, the Byzantine Empire. Usually that's only used now in archaeological terms. Then there was what was once referred to as the Far East, right? Which we don't use that terminology anymore, and especially not in academia. But then sometime around World War I, Europe sort of, I'm saying this candidly, like discovered or had to come into more immediate contact with this space in between after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And so it became, well, the Near East, the Far East, the Middle East. We don't use most of those terms anymore, especially not in academic settings, but Middle East still holds still strong. I mean, Middle East studies, we have conferences, books, etc. So it's like the last colonial holdout, really. And I think it speaks to the ongoing colonial legacies in the region. But I think it's important to change that terminology to make it less political, less Eurocentric, and therefore, as you said, Tisa, more inclusive to a wider area, because we shouldn't define our barriers of what makes us a region by what the European colonial powers once thought of as what constituted this region and who we were.
I agree with what Dr. Al-Naqib just said, and so I won't add to that because she put it so beautifully and succinctly. But at the same time, what I've experienced in my scholarship, I work with Arab American communities and artist communities in particular, who strategically deploy the term Middle East, and it is actually beneficial to them in terms of, let's say, and a theater company that's a nonprofit applying for funding from certain sources, sometimes attaching the term Middle East, because it is such a recognizable term, more so than SWANA, actually gives them a leg up. And that's, I know, important to those vulnerable populations, I would say. So I fully agree with the decolonizing of the term, but at the same time, some artists that I have encountered are also finding ways to reappropriate the term in a more empowering way and just define it by their own, just define it for themselves rather than have the colonial legacy define what Middle East is. And the other thing about the SWANA label, and just, I guess, any labels, is my issue with labels, is that it's hard to put borders around it, right? Our borders are all arbitrary anyway. So what are we really questioning or subverting here? So it's, I think, a constant, tension for me between how to choose to name things, right? Between names, between labels. So that's my 2 cents about it.
I also agree with everything that was just said, and I think that SWANA is easier for some people to put themselves into that category just because it is a little more detailed. Like, for example,
Oh, wait, Rita, I don't think we can hear you.
oh,
Okay.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying that I think SWANA is an easier label for some people to fit into because it's more detailed than Middle East. For example, I'm Armenian, and sometimes I'm like, well, is Armenia Middle Eastern? I don't know. It's kind of on the Caucasus border, but I think it does fit into SWANA. So I think that SWANA is a better label. And then I think Middle East has also developed sort of a negative connotation throughout history and the way it's been portrayed on American news and things like that. So a lot of times the term Middle East is associated with war and bad things that happen in that area. So when we hear about problems in the Middle East, a lot of people kind of brush it off as something that is normal and things that happen over there. And war shouldn't be normal in any area. So I think it's good that the term for that area is changing. so that when people hear about conflicts in the SWANA region, maybe they'll like have a different reaction to hearing about conflicts in the Middle East.
Everyone brought up some really great points. I agree with a lot of the points that everyone brought up. Specifically, Halo, what you brought up about like kind of moving away from like just like kind of like how we moved away from Middle East because it was a limiting term. I think we're kind of seeing this shift towards moving away from SWANA because we're finding the same limitations there. Like Hala kind of pointed out, we're finding limitations in that term as well. Like coming at it from like a political, analysis as well. I'm like, we see that SWANA is kind of limiting in the way that like it is very like geographically specific. Like Rita had pointed out that as well. Like it is very like geographically specific. Like we are very set on like the borders. It is set like there are set like borders, and like how are those borders defined specifically? Like who, like where are the like how are those borders defined? Who defines those borders? You know, like what countries are included in those borders? Like who defines those? And like I think that the way that we found like in the same way that Middle East was kind of limiting in that it was too vague in its its geographical specificity. SWANA is kind of too specific in that way. So like we're seeing like limitations in both of those terms. Like so like I feel like there needs to be kind of a shift in towards a term that like looks at moving towards looking at not just like geographical specificity, but like moving towards geopolitical specificity as well. Like not just being too focused on like the geographical, but like also looking at political as well, because like I think we've been so focused on like borders and like defining ourselves based on those borders and like defining ourselves based on like where we're from and like where we like reside, and we aren't like allowing ourselves to like really understand like where we where are like the SWANA like issues, like where like SWANA like political issues, what political issues like the SWANA region has, like, and like how we as like a SWANA like diaspora can like how we can get like involved in those, and like how we can like combat those, and like what we can do like to like kind of resolve those issues. So I think like that's kind of something that I was thinking about. Like there's not necessarily like one right answer or like where to go from here, but like that's just something that like I was thinking about, like where do we go from here? Like we're still using the term SWANA obviously, but like that's just something like some pushback like on that term as well, like kind of thinking about like what like we're still using the term SWANA, and like it is like with the term SWANA can only exist in like a post-colonial world, and we're not in a like post-colonial world yet, you know. We are not in like a world where we're like we don't exist without like these like political issues. We're still here, we're very politically charged, and we're still like that's just the way that yes, I'm sorry, that's I'm just gonna stop there.
Thank you so much for that, Soha. Thank you all to all the panelists. Yeah, definitely I see a lot of like the same sentiments in all of your answers, and I appreciate. Okay, the next question is okay, so the decision to exclude SWANA or MENA, which stands for Middle Eastern and North African, So the decision to exclude a SWANA or a MENA category from the 2020 census by the previous administration was a big loss for the SWANA community. With that checkoff box on the census, SWANA communities could begin to gain representation for health research, help with language assistance, have more detailed educational outcomes, etc. And so now, because of this, SWANA communities are still categorized under white as their racial category. Additionally, this leaving off a SWANA category continues to create a sense of confusion around identity. What would this box on censuses or applications mean to you? And why is it important or not to your sense of identity and the way you are racialized?
In terms of what it would mean to me personally, and now keeping in mind, I'm new to the United States, right? I'm still transitioning into the hyphenated identity. I'm still Arab. I'm in process to becoming an Arab American, right? But I'd never really thought of myself before moving here in racial terms, even though I've lived in the US at different times before. I never really thought about, because again, I was never on my way to becoming a citizen. So I always felt sort of outside of those discussions on race from a personal experience. In my own country, I always was much more conscious of, for instance, my own privilege as a Kuwaiti citizen in contradistinction to those who are excluded from that, and similar kinds of processes of exclusion therefore occur there. So I've always been thinking about those terms, but thinking about myself in racial terms only has been, here in the United States, is a new process. And I want to share two little anecdotes, I guess, from my first couple of weeks here to express where I fall into this sort of tension now. One of the, like my second or third day in town, I came to Cal Poly to sign my paperwork, right? And I was doing all of my personnel paperwork. And I mentioned this last night for the people who were at that event. I was really surprised when I was identifying my race and I saw, it was my first time filling in like that kind of official paperwork where it gave me race and including next to white in parentheses, Middle Eastern. Like it's like, that's you're white, you know? And I was surprised. In the moment, I just kind of laughed it off. I was like, oh, I'm white. I didn't know I was white. So I check off the box of white. And I didn't really think about much in the moment about sort of what that meant. And then a few days later, you know, I was still new in town, didn't know anybody really. And I was having dinner one night and I was sitting at the bar at a place because I was alone, and I was sitting there and I ended up chatting and having a conversation with the man sitting next to me, who was, I will mention, was white. And I mentioned I've just moved here. I'm teaching at Cal Poly. I'm teaching Middle Eastern history, and you know, I was from the Middle East. And what he basically said to me was, he said, "Oh, well, you kind of can pass as white. You don't have an accent at all. You know, you don't sound Arab." So basically what he said is that, you know, you'll be okay. You'll be, the students will listen to you. The students will be okay with you. Basically what he was saying was, I'm a more palatable vessel to be teaching Middle Eastern history at Cal Poly because I don't look Arab, I don't sound Arab, I'm not wearing a hijab or whatever he in his mind was the stereotype of what an Arab was. And so he said, well, the students will be more accepting learning about this contentious region of the world from an Arab that looks like you, that sounds like you. In the moment, I didn't know what to do with that information. I mean, first of all, I thought, well, I feel, even though I hadn't even started teaching it and I hadn't met anyone yet, I said, I feel like that's really selling Cal Poly students short, and I've been very happy to find that that's true, that my perception was true, not his, and it's never been an issue. But it was the first time I was, you know, I was thinking of myself. I said, I never thought that I would be an acceptable Arab because I might be lighter skinned or don't have an accent when I mean, I don't know what that means. We all have an accent when we speak. It's just what you assume somebody's accent is supposed to be or not be. Or he even said, because I'm not wearing a hijab. And I'd never thought about that myself that way, as a certain type of Arab. And it was the first time I'd really, and it was immediately like, well, suddenly that check mark that I sort of laughed off the week before, I wasn't laughing anymore, right? It was in that moment that really I started thinking, it was my immediate exposure to this tension of what it means to be white on paper, but clearly, you know, as an Arab, I'm, you know, because I might pass, I'm less threatening, is what this man was basically telling me. And that was one of the first conversations I had after moving, you know, here randomly. So I don't know, that doesn't really answer the question per se, but I think it just sort of, you know, signifies how it's a newcomer coming into this world. And I've learned even so much more about this. I mean, some of my first conversations about this was with SWANA students at the SWANA club meetings and stuff early on, and speaking about this, and I had never really thought about that. So it's not a well articulated answer yet in terms of what that would mean to me, but it's definitely something that I've realized the deeper complexity of it that I never did before I moved here. So I'll leave it at that. I know it doesn't really answer the question, but it's sort of my experience of it.
No, right. I remember talking with you at the SWANA meeting my third year and asking you like what can we do about the fact that because SWANA students like incoming students have to put their white they're not invited to PCW, the orientation event. And I remember like asking you what can we do about this, or like, do you know anything about this that could help us? And we were both
And
like,
I was shocked.
confounded.
And I had no, and it's still like now we're trying to put together a faculty staff association, and we don't have the information of who's out there, short of me sending emails and badgering. And I know several people here have been getting my emails about it, because we have no way of getting information on who identifies as being of this region. Because again, in all of our official personnel paperwork, we're white, same as what the students, why you guys had such a struggle to get that information out there too.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
It's so interesting, your story, but I also, by the way, I check other or do not disclose because I don't want to be counted as white, because that's not how I identify. So that's my revealing my paperwork choices. But yeah, the experience that you had, that sounds very familiar. I'm not a recent immigrant, but I came when I was 12 years old to the United States, and that was my, I had a similar realization, I think, as you, in terms of how, you know, race suddenly became a very salient concept, and the racial difference became a salient thing for me when it wasn't before. And the question of, you know, where's your accent? That's one I got a lot, for sure. But more specifically in terms of the census, or the question on the census, I think the checkbox, I have the same issue with it as I do with other labels, like what I talked about in the previous question, because it's so limiting, and it perpetuates the myth of race, right, of racial difference. And at the same time, I mean, this is a system that's very hard to dismantle. And having a box, what would that mean to me? I think it would mean that I am no longer invisible, right, or other, you know, something obscure and not defined, that my government would actually recognize me for who I am. Not just my government, but any institutions like Cal Poly, you know, would actually recognize me accurately for who I am. And I don't have to alter my perspective, I guess, to be able to fit into the system. So it's about belonging, I think, to me. And even from a professional perspective, it would mean that I could also better support the artists that I work with, right? If they're able to check a box, if we have data on the SWANA community, on SWANA organizations, then we can actually, you know, help those communities and those organizations sustain themselves. And so that's what a census change would really mean for me.
Yeah, I think on the census, there's a area where you can put other and then write in your race. I think there's that option. And I think that's also a very important thing to do, even though, as you said, it's annoying that your box isn't there. We should be putting in our race on that line until our box is there, hopefully one day. But yeah, putting that in can be very helpful for your community. For example, I'm from Glendale, where the Armenian population is very huge. And so every year when it's time to fill out the census, all the Armenians are on Instagram saying, make sure you fill out the census and make sure you write Armenian on the other area. So by doing this, we make it easier for Armenians to get more resources from both state and federal government programs. And it affects Armenian educational programs and language resources. So these things actually make a big difference. And it's easy for some of us who might not need these resources to just like write white if we're white passing, but or just not even do the census at all. But it's important that even though our box isn't there, to put it in, because it does help a lot of people. And the purpose of the census is to find out who's there and what appropriate resources can be created. So if it's inaccurate, which it is if everyone's putting white and most of those or some of those people aren't actually white, then it's not actually accurate. So it's not really serving its purpose. That's what I think. And as for what it means to me, I always put white when there's no other option. So, but I mean, no matter how many times I put white on an application, I don't feel white. I still feel 100% Armenian. So for me, it's just a box. And when we have the option to put in our race, we 100% should, because in the end, it does get somewhere.
I actually don't think that this decision was important. Like, I actually think that it was actually it wasn't really, it wasn't really an important decision. It was like, okay that they did this because, and the fact that it was seen as a loss means that our community doesn't really understand, doesn't have like a clear understanding of what is race, and race as being like a social construct, a construct that was made, you know, by white people. And what's really great about Cal Poly and like the resources that we have here is that there are like multiple like classes and resources that have done like a really great job of really breaking down like what race is, like a lot of ethnic studies classes of what race is and the difference between like race and ethnicity. And like it's done like a really great job of doing that. And like what I've like learned from these classes is that like race for SWANA folks specifically, like us having like a category on the census being recognized by the state isn't going to help us, because one of our biggest problems is state surveillance. So by having a category for the government to easily surveil us, we're giving them an opportunity to, like, it's going to do more harm than good. We have a big disconnect between like, we don't have a clear understanding of like what are the issues that like are really prevalent in the SWANA like community. Like we're like striving for diversity and inclusion when we should be looking for like the SWANA issues of like surveillance and bordering practices and the war on terror and Islamophobia and imperialism. And once we like realize that those are the issues that we should be really combating, the issues of diversity and like of inclusion, those start to like fall apart. Those don't really become as they don't become as tempting. Those don't become as important to us. We start to have like a more precise political consciousness and understanding. So those are just my thoughts.
Can I jump in on that just real quick? And I agree with what Zoha was just saying. You know, I interviewed at Cal Poly literally the week before, and this was back in January of 2017, right before the implementation of the so-called Muslim ban, right? And I just interviewed at Cal Poly. I didn't even know what my status was going to be. And I flew over from Kuwait. You know, I was there. I was going to be immigrating here. And I remember, you know, once I got here and I felt secure that I managed to get here and I had, you know, was working towards, you know, my permanent residency, which I now have, I thought about what Zaha was just sort of describing. I would think twice about that whenever I would be checking off that box, that I kind of felt a comfort in being able to check the white box, at least until I felt more secure in that sense, right? Because, and again, it's not like, I know it wouldn't really have any bearing on my status or things like that. It's not about where I check a box. It was a psychological kind of thing. And I think it's, I mean, when you were speaking, Zoha, I was thinking about that because I definitely felt that in those earlier period of when things felt a little bit more precarious for people from of Arab, Muslim, etc. descent, for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's really interesting. Something to think about for sure. Okay. So our next question is related to your SWANA identity at Cal Poly. So how have you been able to stay connected with your SWANA culture while at Cal Poly? How does it feel to hold this identity on campus? And how does the work you do at Cal Poly connect to your culture?
For me, obviously, I teach the Middle East. So that's, I mean, I was hired to teach the Middle East first and foremost. So it's sort of embedded into what I do, which I love. I love being able to teach the Middle East here, especially where, you know, students who don't really know that much about the region. I find it extremely enriching. And I've loved teaching the Middle East here at Cal Poly, probably more than I have teaching anywhere else. I think one of the things that has helped me keep a lot more connected with my SWANA, my SWANA culture and identity has started off again with the students, getting connected with the SWANA club and the students, and, you know, getting to host the SWANA cultural commencements over the last couple of years has really been for me wonderful. Like I found, you know, finding that connection and community with students first, even before you know, finding, and I remember the first time I went to an Arab music ensemble concert, I cried because I felt, it was one of the first times I was in a space on campus where I just felt immersed in my culture. And it was the first time I'd really felt that, and it caught me off guard, and I did sort of get emotional in the moment. So I think, I think these kinds of spaces that are being created more and more are essential. And I think that, you know, anything that I can do to get more involved in these kinds of spaces and communities. And I think that our students, you guys have just do such an incredible job of creating that sense of community for us on campus. I think you guys have really taken the lead in creating a SWANA culture for those of us who come from that, you know, who identify in that way at Cal Poly. So I commend you guys for that, for sure.
I also immediately connected with the Arab Music Ensemble when I first moved here. I moved here about a year and a half ago and had heard even before I came here of the Arab Music Ensemble and was like, yes, I'm going straight to Ken's office. It was like first week that I got here. And I said, how can I be part of this? And so I am a member now, and I play the derbuka, and I really enjoy it, and I completely identify with that feeling of euphoria, and that like a warm euphoria when you're just immersed in your familiar culture, in a community where that's not very common, right? Where it's not easily accessible. So yeah, so that was one of the ways that I connected, but also in my teaching, as Farah said, like I also try to engage students in Arab topics and Arab performance. That's my research specialty, but also I try to weave it into, in dialogue with other, I want to say, ethnically specific theater that I teach. For example, right now I'm teaching a race and gender and performance class, and we talk about African American, Asian American, and Arab American playwrights in the same breath. We're kind of weaving the related issues together. So it's finding solidarity in community and across communities is also another way I've been trying to connect at Cal Poly, and also working with Farah on building community among faculty and staff. I think that's pretty important. And also connecting with students. I mean, Tisa was my student in the very first class that I taught at Cal Poly back in the fall, and made an appointment with me in office hours the very first week of class and introduced me to the SWANA student group, and I attended a few times, and it's just it's really great to seek each other out like that and build those connections.
I connected with SWANA culture at Cal Poly by joining clubs. I joined ASA during my freshman year, and I found out that it wasn't very active. So I did experience some culture shock for the first time in my life, since I grew up in Glendale, which is very Armenian. So what I did is I began to teach my whole dorm and my friends some Armenian. So that kind of helped me, surprisingly. But the next year I joined ISCO and became friends with them, and also a lot of people from SWANA. And this is where I realized that a lot of their cultures were similar to Armenian culture. And so I felt very comfortable with them. And so I would like to also thank SWANA and ISCO for taking me in and teaching me about all of their cultures and letting me teach them about mine. And I think that's one of the greatest things that I've taken from Cal Poly, was meeting all of them. So anyway, in my third year, which is this year, I decided ASA needed to become active. So I became president. I gathered all my new freshmen and all the freshmen from last year who didn't know we existed. And we now have a good group of Armenians at Cal Poly who are there for each other and who work so well together. And it's great to have a group of people from our culture, because that helps us connect with our culture simply by being together or even just talking in a chat. And so we did a lot of work during the fall quarter to raise money for Armenians who had been displaced by the war that began in September between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And we also raised awareness about the war crimes being committed by Azerbaijan. So we got to meet up with other cultural clubs and have representatives from our club go present to them about these things and what's going on in Armenia. And we ended up raising thousands of dollars and talking to a bunch of different groups. So that was amazing. And then, yeah, so working together with other Cal Poly students that are Armenian to benefit our own country made us all closer. And I'm so proud of every single one of them, especially the freshmen, for it was their first quarter and they just did such an amazing job. And so I'm very excited to be with them in person next year, because we're gonna have a solid Armenian community, and the freshmen that come in for the next few years will have no culture shock. So that's what I'm excited about.
Similar to Rita, I also joined clubs. I joined the MSA, so the Muslim Student Association, and SWANA my freshman year. I am now on the SWANA board this year. I was on the SWANA board last year as well. well. And we're as active as we can be in quarantine. We try our best. We're trying. I think we're doing a pretty good job. We're a very cute little group. We have cute little meetings. I enjoy our club. So I made most of my best friends through both MSA and SWANA. Most of my closest friends throughout college through SWANA. Most of my closest friends are like SWANA, and I think I have like maybe one or two friends that have not been a part of the SWANA community, SWANA community all throughout my college career. So I can say that being a part of the SWANA community has been a very like important part of being at Cal Poly. But I think one of the most influential moments of like SWANA moments at Cal Poly has been taking the critical SWANA studies theorizing class that was started by one of my best friends and a recent Cal Poly alumni, Mustafa Siddiqui. She ran the class, and she ran and like planned, like she created and ran the class herself through the ethnic studies department. So we did like an entire like quarter's worth of SWANA studies readings. We did like Palestinian studies. We looked at like SWANA studies in convergence with like Black studies and feminism and like trans studies. We looked at like scholars like Sarah Ahmed and like Jasmine Puar, who actually came. We were able to bring her to campus about like a month ago. And so I was able to learn a lot about a lot of the things that I know about the SWANA region and about like SWANA studies is through this class. And I don't think I would have had as much knowledge about SWANA studies as I do now had I not taken this class, had I not done these readings and had these conversations every week, twice a week for an entire quarter. And if this class is ever offered again, I would highly recommend it to, even if you're not like a SWANA, even if you're like not a member of the SWANA community, like to take it, just because like it was, the reading list was amazing. Like it did an amazing job of tying together both like not just like SWANA readings, but also like other studies, like I had mentioned, like Black studies as well. But yeah, that was just one of the things that I remember dearly. It wasn't just like taking a class. It was like being able to connect with the cohort that I was a part of, and so that was just one of the things that I remember a lot.
Thank you for sharing. And yes, shout out Mustafa. Okay. So I think this will be our last question before we take some Q&A from the audience. Okay, so our last question is, many of us are considered the SWANA diaspora as the first generation Americans in our families or as recently immigrated peoples. With this dual identity comes this disconnect from both sides that I'm sure we're all familiar with. How are you able to maintain ties with your home countries? How do you gain that sense of belonging to a culture that can seem so foreign at times?
For me, I mean, my whole family is still back home in Kuwait. This is actually the longest I've gone in my life without going back to Kuwait because of COVID. So it's been over a year. But so for me, you know, pre-COVID, I was still able to travel back and forth. It's still also my research place. And I think that's also maybe one of the ways in which I continue to maintain those connections beyond even just my connections to my family and close friends. there, but also to what's going on, always keeping abreast of changes and the same kinds of things I used to, be involved with when I was there. Even for the purposes of my research, it helps me maintain those ties and connections. Also, I've tried to do so through my teaching. So it's not only that I'm teaching the Middle East. One of the things I've been trying to do also is integrate virtual exchange components into classes. So I've been doing some where we've done like virtual discussions and exchanges with students, for instance, at the university in Kuwait that I was teaching at for 8 years before I came here at the American University of Kuwait. So bringing students together, like we did an event last quarter or in the fall during elections week. Where we just did activities that were entirely focused on this virtual exchange, discussing the outcome of the election and the impact and bearing that would have on the region, on the Middle East and so on. And students we gave them similar readings and so on. And this was with a former colleague of mine. So even through teaching, I want to try and maintain some of those personal connections and cultural connections, but also bringing my students here into that world as well. The other, funny thing is that I feel like, I don't know, so quickly I started to feel like a tourist when I would go back home in the most cliched way. I suddenly started buying like the Arabic coffee pots, the della and the little cups and things, and they're just to bring them to my house here. It's like I lived in Kuwait all those years and decades of my life and never owned an Arabic coffee pot in my own house, but here I had to have one. So now whenever I go back, I just become a sort of cliche tourist, and I go to the souk and I get all of these things and I stock up. I mean, I have jars of Arabic coffee that I haven't used in like 2 years, but I just needed it. I needed my cupboard in my kitchen to smell of cardamom and, those kinds of things. So it's just funny how quickly I sort of became that, that sort of culture seeker, even though I'm still like, nothing has changed about who I am and where my second home, my original home is and my family is, but I just needed those little accoutrements around me in my house here to feel like home.
Absolutely identify with that. The smell of the coffee just really takes you places, for sure. Yeah, that's, I was thinking of this question from a personal perspective, and I was thinking immediately, of food, music, and language as ways that I stay connected. I keep up with all of the musical trends. I try to as much as possible, and of course through the Arab Music Ensemble, I study it a little bit more closely. I maintain my language, and I also, as Farah mentioned, also have a lot of family still there in Lebanon and Syria and other places. So maintaining contact with them, which thanks to technology is really easy these days, right? But I still remember the days when we first immigrated here and we had to get those calling cards where you scratch off the number and then you dial and wait for a while. It was just, yeah. But anyway, so maintaining connections, maintaining relationships, practicing the language, cooking the food and playing the music, and reaching out and seeking community too, seeking connections even professionally. I didn't, I feel like the timing of my immigration really shaped my relationship to, the homeland. And I was still young enough where I could completely assimilate into US culture, and at the same time old enough where I have a lot of ties, emotional ties that can never be satisfied in my life here. So I don't, maybe this is something that a lot of diasporic individuals experience, but there's, even in community here in the diaspora, as we celebrate our places of origin, cultures of origin, I feel personally that I always carry a little bit of a sadness in terms of the loss, right? Like it's never going to be exactly the same as you would experience it back home, right? So it's kind of a double-sided, coin or double-edged sword, whatever you want to call it. It is, it's really beautiful and wonderful to be able to maintain the culture and the connections despite being in the diaspora. And at the same time, it's always a reminder of what is being grieved and what has been lost. But yeah, connections, I think people make the connections really vibrant and meaningful, and that's what I have to say about that.
I definitely agree with how you said music and food and connecting with people in your culture helps you connect with your home. Where I was born in the US, so I definitely do feel the effects of dual identity. So when I was a freshman at Cal Poly, every single new person I met thought I was a exchange student. And people would ask me about my accent, and I would tell them, I have no idea why I have an accent. I was born and raised in the US. It might be because I lived in Glendale with Armenians my whole life. Or it might be because I was taught Armenian first and then English. But the catch with that is when I come to Armenia and I speak Armenian, everyone here automatically knows that I'm not a local and I have an accent in Armenian. So there was a point when it did bother me a little bit that people thought I wasn't from the US, in the US. And they would ask, what accent is that? And I would be like, I don't know. But I started to like eventually think it was pretty cool because I haven't heard my accent anywhere else. So, and then I started to love explaining these things to people because when they ask me, I get to talk about my culture, and that's very exciting for me. So I think the best way to feel connected to your culture when you do feel like you don't fit the mold of either of them is to teach your friends from one culture about the other. And in doing that, you're kind of connecting the two because that's exactly where you are. And yeah, I think a lot of Armenian diasporans especially experience this because our diaspora is so large. And so there's more Armenians outside of Armenia than inside of Armenia because of the genocide that happened in 1915. So we're all kind of spread out around the world. And it's also comforting to know that there's so many people that are in the same exact situation as you because of the same reason as you. So yeah, that's my experience.
I grew up, I went to like an Islamic school, so a lot of my childhood was really just, it revolved around like culture and religion. So I grew up around my extended family. My mom's family lives all around me. My mom like has her brother's family and her sister's family. Their houses live right next to mine. My mom, like they tried to like mimic the family system that they have back home. So they really tried to bring what they had in Pakistan back here. So I obviously don't know like what my parents had like in Pakistan, but I know what they raised me with here. So I don't like, I've grown up like with the language, and I've grown up reading Quran and learning Islam. Like I've had like from like kindergarten to 8th grade, I was in Islamic school surrounded by other Muslims and people who were mostly SWANA. So like hadn't met a white person until I went to like high school. So I really just was kind of really isolated in that kind of environment and really surrounded by rich cultures and kind of immersed in my own culture and in the cultures of other SWANA folks for a long time, and kind of grew to like really even if it wasn't necessarily my own, I really grew to appreciate the like SWANA cultures in general. It took me a while to kind of appreciate my own SWANA culture, because like I was surrounded by other SWANA cultures, and it was like there was just like things that you work through as a child, you know. But with this, like Islam was a big part of my childhood. Like religion and culture are so mixed together for a lot of Muslim kids, and for a lot of like SWANA cultures in general. So for me as a Muslim child, that was like, I think for a lot of Muslim children, that is the experience that you'll hear from them, is that their culture was very intertwined with their religion. And so you can't really separate those two. So you'll hear that their experience of culture and religion were kind of mixed. So that is really where that was my story. And so that's kind of what I have to say about that.
I just want to drop one thing into the chat, that Hala, what you were saying about the sadness of that, always that sort of feeling of sadness of the loss of what was left behind. And it reminded me of this quote. I'm putting it in there, it's long, it's by Edward Said, and writing about sort of the sadness of exile. So I just wanted to put that, because I know it's a long quote, so I just want to explain why I'm putting that into the chat. But when Hala was mentioning that, I thought about this line, this quote from one of his works.
Thank you everyone for sharing. That was beautiful. I love hearing about the ways we stay connected. It's so wholesome. Okay, we had one question, and it is okay, and it's by Bea. And they said, you all have discussed the ways in which student clubs and affinity spaces have contributed to a sense of belonging at Cal Poly. What are things that Cal Poly as an institution can do more of, or better to support SWANA wellness and belonging? I'll put that in the chat. And then also, if anyone else has questions, please feel free to message me.
I'll jump in, just because I've been in the process just over the last few weeks of trying to put some things together, including among, as I mentioned, a faculty staff association. And that's just been relying on getting, you know, other associate deans and deans of colleges to help spread the email, and just get a sign, like I've created a sign up thing on Google. So just as much as to get sort of administrative support for those kinds of things, because when it's just coming from the level of the individual faculty member, you feel like you're just sort of, you're only reaching certain pockets of groups, right? Certain email lists that you might be on. Whereas if there is a stronger institutional support or you know, drive to really help that, you know, outside of just, you know, your own college, which I feel tremendous support from, you know, but it goes beyond just, I don't want to just be looking within CLA, you know, which is my college, but going across. But sometimes when you're just on your own, you just don't really know where to go or how to proceed. So the kind of institutional support to even take the lead, or helping to, you know, I don't know, yeah, that kind of support for a faculty staff association too. And that way, then we can then start to create those synergies with the student groups as well.
I don't know if we're still going in order, but I'm still relatively new to Cal Poly, so I'm still learning what those needs are and what the support structures, you know, hopefully will look like in the future. But yeah, I second what Farah is saying, and definitely will look to do my part, I think, to try to help make those connections.
Rita or Zoha, if y'all have anything to share, feel free.
I think they got everything that could be done from administration at least. I think most of it is, and I feel like most of it is up to the students, because sometimes I feel like the more the school gets involved, the more complicated it gets. But yeah, that's just my opinion.
For faculty staff who are here who might be interested, I did just drop the Google form link into the chat. So that's just, we're trying to just collect information and contact, and if you're interested in an FSA. So I just put the link into there, and just please, and I know some of you here have already signed up, but just share far and wide with anyone who affiliates, even, it doesn't even have to be through, even by association with SWANA, but who'd be interested in the SWANA FSA. I put the link there.
I'm working on a campus health and well-being project right now, and one of the things that we were discussing is like advocating for more like campus like hires in campus health and well-being, in like specific for specific for specific identity groups, because we're seeing like a lack of representation in campus health and well-being. And so like definitely something for administration is like advocating for like SWANA hires. Definitely that's something to push for.
All really amazing suggestions. I think we have one more. I think we have time for one more from the audience. We have like 5 minutes, and I know this is kind of a loaded question, but just feel free to share as much as you would like. So this is a question by Olivia, and they said, "What kinds of SWANA futures do you imagine for yourself and for generations after? And what does a post-colonial world look like to you?"
I'm going to give up my first rank position while I think about that for a second.
Yeah, that is a very big question.
I'm going to pass that on to you while I think about it. Can you put
Yeah, can you put it in the chat?
Oh, yeah. Of course.
It's the kind of question we need to revisit and read through.
Yes, say less.
For myself, I see myself doing something to help Armenia and I don't know, somehow get the rest of the world to see what's going on over there, because I mean there was a whole war a few months ago that most of the world hasn't even heard about. And there were countless war crimes committed, families displaced from their ethnic homes, and no one's heard about it. And the people that are the government that did it all got away with it. They got rewarded. And on top of that, these are the same governments that never recognize the genocide and say it never happened. So I feel like for Armenia, at least, this is a cycle that just keeps happening, and I hope sometime in my life I can do something to change that. Thank you.
I'll take it. I mean, I'm not sure. I think there is such a thing as a post-colonial world, or like a post-colonial world, you know what I mean? I think we will forever be living in a post-colonial world, because colonialism just fundamentally changed the world and in permanent ways. And I don't think we'll ever live in a world where we're not feeling the legacies of centuries of colonialism. Not to say that everything in the world, we just blame it on the European powers, but I just think it's the fact of the reality of the world, that the world transformed And so I don't think there is such a thing as a sort of post-colonial world, as in a world that we can see as something separate from the world that colonialism created. So I'm not sure. I mean, I can think of a utopian idea of what I would want a post-colonial world to look like, but I don't know. I don't think, we as in any way, and particularly even environmentally, like, I don't know if we'll ever really live in a post-colonial world.
But along the same lines, I think it's a borderless world is where my thinking went, and the question says, what kind of SWANA future do you imagine for yourself? And I said, I was thinking, SWANA should be a state of mind and not a geographic region. SWANA, like, to me, is an identification, is a way of being, right? And I think if we approached our identities in that way, we could build a lot more bridges than borders, right? So that's the future I want to imagine. I want to imagine one where solidarities are built, where commonalities are explored, and differences are celebrated and respected. Still thinking about the post-colonial part of it, though. Go ahead, Farah.
Well, no, on that note, I mean, being from the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, I would love to also see a region where that artificial barrier is no longer in place, right? This is this constructed division between the Arabian world and the Persian, and we're always, there's always fights. It's the Arabian Gulf, no, it's the Persian Gulf. Like, we live right in the heart of that. And I think that's also something for the region that I just want to see done away with. I know it's not going to happen in a long time. There's a lot of factors that are contributing to perpetuating it, but that's, what I would love to see as a future for the region, is the Arab, and Iranian or Persian, that idea is just dissipating.
So true. So true. Yes, I completely agree. All right, everyone. Thank you so much to all 4 of our panelists. Y'all were amazing, and I appreciate all of the emotional labor, and all of just you pouring your heart out in front of all of these people. We really appreciate it, and so honored to have y'all for the first ever State of SWANA.